3 minutes after 10 is the time, and I find myself occasionally looking at events in the news and wondering whether or not someone has accidentally activated April Fool's Day based decisions rather than the middle of September. And yesterday was very much one of those moments. You know, with social media these days, things can look so realistic, can't they? You can knock up a complete scam, a complete prank that looks exactly like the real thing. You can imitate the fonts that news websites use. You can make a completely homemade piece of nonsense look exactly like it's been published by an august an organisation as the BBC. You really can. And even someone who's been in this trade for 26, best part of quarter of a century. Oh my days. I mean, look, a quarter of a century ago, I was doing shifts on newspapers, but I was still flogging suits at the weekend. But I have actually been in this profession for the best part now of a quarter of a century, believe it or not. And I get fooled by stuff. I do a double take. I do a little bit of a head wobble sometimes, and I sometimes think that simply can't be true. So let me preface all that follows by telling you that some of the stuff that is likely to appear in front of me today may not be true. I'm fairly confident that my sources are accurate on the British Guinea Pig Association story. I do believe that they have taken a decision in the highest echelons of guinea pig related power in this country to move Guinea Pig Awareness Week forward 1 week. So instead of beginning on the 19th of September, when of course we bid a final farewell to Her Majesty, it will now begin on the 26th of September. If you need to take a moment now to adjust your diaries or your calendars, I'll wait for you because I don't want you to miss any of the programme today. So if you just want to make that clear, get that into your Google Calendar or whatever it is you use to manage your schedule. Guinea Pig Awareness Week will now take place from the 26th to the 30th of September. Because if we can agree about anything as a population, we can agree that we wouldn't be able to properly observe Guinea Pig Awareness Week in the same week as a royal funeral. I think we can all agree about that. In these times of division, argument and performative contradiction, I think at least we can find little islands of consensus, islands, pockets, if you will, of unanimity. And the notion of trying to properly observe Guinea Pig Awareness Week while also mourning Her Majesty the Queen would clearly be impossible. And they are, of course, not alone. Centre Parcs perhaps leads the field. I don't know what the phenomenon is, or what you would actually call it. Nintendo Switch, I can tell you, will not be doing a live stream. They will instead be publishing a video on demand on their YouTube channel tomorrow as a mark of respect during this period of national mourning. I can also tell you that the Clay Calling Festival, or actually if you're familiar with that part of Norfolk, you'll know it's Clay Calling Festival has been cancelled, not postponed. That is not too far from Sandringham, so perhaps some sense there as well. And the Doncaster Music Hub has announced that all Music Hub activity will now be cancelled on Monday as a mark of respect. Now, we are, as ever, walking that tightrope between a proper respect, which I do feel, and I know most people listening to this programme, but not all. And if you wanted to hold up a piece of paper expressing the fact that you don't hold much truck with the monarchy, although you do appreciate the poignancy of the passing of any human being, then you are more than welcome to listen to this programme. I certainly won't be getting you arrested or encouraging the old Bill to cart you away. However, equally, you can't press pause on being human. And this is where I think my theory is pretty strong, okay? Because I spent the weekend wondering why it was the football it started with. And it's only Wednesday. I came up with this theory on Sunday. And my goodness me, if it wasn't copper-bottomed before, then Centre Parcs have absolutely pushed it to the very fringes of inevitability. How could you possibly argue with my theory now when you've seen what everyone from Centre Parcs to the British Guinea Pig Association have done? Quite a few of you telling me, Heather Jones at the front of the queue, that you are apparently already aware of guinea pigs. Yeah, well, you might be, Heather, but lots of people aren't, and that's why Guinea Pig Awareness Week is such an important part of our national calendar. And I've already had a complaint as well from Rebecca, I think, or RV, who is gutted about Guinea Pig Awareness Week being postponed and suggests I could have actually broken it to you more gently. Do you think we should have had a trigger warning on that? Possibly? Okay, so I'll be careful about what other announcements I make in the course of this morning that are arguably slightly excessive responses to both the period of national mourning and specifically to Monday's funeral. But then you stop about... Oh dear, we've got another complaint as well. This is very upsetting, James. It's Jewish New Year that week. Guinea Pig Awareness Week being at the same time is very inconsiderate. I'm not sure how I'll be able to manage my calendar. This is public service broadcasting at its purest. I think we can all agree. This is bringing information to you that you're not going to find anywhere else that is of profound importance to your family and indeed to your life. But it's also serious. There is also something serious going on. And I stared at the story at the weekend in a way I often do, hoping that it would begin to make sense in a way that it didn't at first glance. Why is the FA running so scared? Why are even Sunday morning football matches involving 10-year-old boys and girls being cancelled, being postponed, being called off? And I think I worked it out. I really do think I worked it out. Imagine what it feels like if you are the police officer who is policing a gay pride march and briefly dances. Because you got caught up in the mood of the moment, you are doing your job, you are keen to engage in a little bit of impromptu community outreach, and the mood is both joyous and buoyant. So you have a little bit of a boogie, and some weirdo with a camera phone films it, and you end up not just photographed in the Daily Mail, but with your name, rank and serial number there as well. Imagine what it feels like if you are a social worker who tragically is ultimately in charge of some appalling event that probably couldn't be avoided, but we can all wish that it had been. And you practically get your postcode printed in the newspapers. They'll publish the price that you paid for your house, or not even that if you've been in it for 20 years. They publish the price that you would theoretically get if you decided to sell your house tomorrow. And that is apparently fair game. If you are an Extinction Rebellion protester deploying fairly robust tactics in an attempt to save the planet, then you are fair game. They'll print your star sign. They'll print your inside leg measurement. They'll print your parents' profession. They'll print absolutely everything about you. And if that's not your world, if you're not used to that, imagine how traumatizing, and I don't use that word lightly, imagine how traumatizing that would be. And if you think it's tough for little people, for want of a better word, just spare a thought for a moment of what it would be like for High Court judges to be described as enemies of the people on the front page of the best-selling newspaper in the country, or what it would be like for example, the Duchess of Sussex this morning to recognise that some corners of the media have decided that it's time to start swinging at her again. So that's, I think, why it happens. I genuinely do. During the French Revolution, Tom tells us, it was the most dangerous thing you could do was to appear less patriotic than your neighbour. It was almost as if there was a performative competition. And it's not real patriotism. It really isn't. There's a story that popped up again today from a few years ago when the most plastic of all patriots, Nigel Farage, was condemning Prince Charles for criticising Vladimir Putin. I'll tell you that again before he appears on television in his Union flag underpants. Nigel Farage, Mr. Brexit himself, criticising Prince Charles, now king of these islands, for condemning the actions of Vladimir Putin. You pick a side there. Tell me who's patriotic. Incredible scenes, all fermented and nurtured by right-wing newspapers that turn almost everything they can into a target. And that is why I actually have some sympathy for the decision makers at Center Parcs. It was one of the stupidest decisions in the history of decisions, not just in the history of decisions taken by holiday camps or decisions taken by PR departments, in the history of decisions. When would you date the beginning of the history of decisions? What would you go back to? Possibly Eve in the Garden of Eden, depending on your religious perspectives. We'll start with Eve. That was a bad decision, Eve. But at least she had the temptation of the serpent to blame it on when she plucked the forbidden fruit and sank her molars into that infernal apple. That was probably the beginning of the history of bad decisions for the Judeo-Christian culture. The beginning of, I think the Center Parcs decision is up there. I think the decision by Center Parcs to announce that they would in fact be sending home paying customers on the day of Her Majesty's funeral and not letting them back into the building until Tuesday morning. One customer I saw was sent a message telling her that she was free to leave her belongings, and I'm afraid we're all thinking undercrackers. She was free to leave her undercrackers in the drawers in the cabin that she'd paid for, but she wouldn't be able to stay in the cabin herself. I tweeted yesterday, and the moment I did it, I knew I'd regret it. I tweeted yesterday a plea to Center Parcs not to reverse this decision until at least 11 o'clock today, because I thought we could have some fun with it. Thankfully, we are still having fun with it, despite the fact that they did subsequently reverse this decision long before 11 o'clock today. So, what's the question? The question is this. Why do you think this is happening? What is this? What explains, if it's not the right-wing media, and you can, of course, agree with me if you want, you're not going to hear many other people in this profession taking this perspective, because they'll be at the front of the queue of people attacking everybody from a dancing policeman to Meghan Markle with climate change protesters sat in between the two positions. It is a fear of being bullied by the media. The same media that essentially brought you Brexit, Boris Johnson, all the other disasters that have befallen this country in the last few years. Find me a media bully in Britain and I'll show you someone that was a Boris Johnson cheerleader and a big supporter of Brexit. Simples. I don't know why they go hand in hand, but they do. So why have these institutions overreacted in this way? Another complaint. It would be incisors that were sunk into the infernal apple, not molars. Well, it depends how big a bite you took, actually, if you want to get pedantic about it, or indeed how big the apple was, or how big Eve's mouth was. But we digress. What's going on? And I'd love to talk to you on a slightly more serious note about what it's like to be involved in these decision-making processes, about what the pressures are. We can all be respectful. I hope that we all will be respectful. You're going to get lessons in etiquette and decorum from a man who misled the Queen about the unlawful prorogation of Parliament. Jacob Rees-Mogg in his top hat, giving it the butter wouldn't melt, but he actively lied to her when she was alive. This hypocrisy, this faux patriotism, this ludicrous forelock tugging is not authentic. It is not sincere. The most authentic and sincere responses from people will not be made by idiots filming themselves while laying flowers. They'll be made very quietly. They'll be made today in the queue by people who probably don't even want to give a vox pop to Theo Washerwood. And frankly, who could blame them? They'll be made privately, silently, quietly, discreetly, respectfully. And that seems to me to be the opposite of what many public institutions are doing. And I want you to tell me why. Why have so many organisations got it so wrong? And look, it's 10:16 and it's Wednesday. And if you want to tell me that they haven't got it wrong and Center Parcs should have stayed shut, and possibly that Guinea Pig Awareness Week definitely shouldn't have started on Monday, and that Nintendo Switch shouldn't be putting out a pre-recorded live stream instead of an actual live stream, then feel free to do so. British Cycling have now, I believe, removed the recommendation that everybody gets off their bike on Monday during the hours of the funeral, Stuart tells me, rather than ordering or suggesting that people should not go. But British Cycling, this was the original recommendation, strongly recommends that anybody out riding their bike on the day of the state funeral does so outside of the timings of the funeral service and associated professions, which will be confirmed later this week. This makes the conversation more interesting because that's not been done for fear of being bullied by the Daily Mail or popping up in one of Richard Littlejohn's ridiculous columns. That's been done for reasons I do not understand. Why would the people that run British Cycling, I nearly did an everyday sexism then and said bloke, why would the people who run British Cycling even think of advising their members not to ride their bicycles at the time of the funeral? We might need psychologists on this, never mind PR experts. I don't know who would be able to answer these questions, but why have so many institutions, and to a lesser extent individuals, have overreacted in such a unfortunate and even crass way? I'll give you absolute terror of being bullied by a completely morally bankrupt media. And if they'll go after High Court judges, they'll go after you. They'll go after Centre Parcs. They'll go after Butlins, although they actually move fairly quickly to get a PR win out of Centre Parcs' debacle. But what else is there? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 10:18 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're wondering, well, you know what we're wondering. Hopefully by 11 o'clock, because your contribution to this programme is so good, we won't be wondering anymore. 10:21 is the time. I'm sorry, Adam, for your experiences, and I hope that the appointment is rescheduled as quickly as possible. We will turn our attention a little later in the programme, perhaps, to the serious elements of the conversation that we're having at the moment. But I'm working, and I'm sure you'll agree, Adam, on the principle that we could probably do with a slightly more light-hearted conversation at this point in the week than we've managed to have thus far. But I shall read your message in full, because I know everybody listening will share my sympathy for you. My neurosurgery, Adam tells me, which I've been waiting for 9 months, has been cancelled on Monday. I wasn't sure the right-wing media would attack surgeons, but in this country I have little faith in logic anymore. That's how far we were fallen. I've lost all faith in this country. I don't know for sure that they'd attack surgeons either. But you wouldn't put it past them, would you? Doctors, firefighters, police officers, teachers, you name it. They're fair game for the Daily Mail and its diabolical editorial attitudes. And that is why many of the outwardly ridiculous decisions taken by companies, individuals, institutions in the aftermath of Her Majesty's death have been made. They are terrified of being bullied. And frankly, who can blame them? 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Andy's in Cheltenham. Andy, what's going on?
I just wondered, James, whether there's something here about the way we mourn as a culture. And actually, I think we've lost the ability to mourn. I'm actually a church minister, and so I take a number of funerals, and I often talk to grieving families about the difference between grieving and mourning. And yes. So grieving is that internal, we all grieve lots of different things, but mourning is what culture tells us we should do.
Right.
Now, culture tells us that we should wear black at funerals, right?
Yes.
And so the BBC News are all wearing black.
Yes.
Why do we wear black? There's no reason for it. You actually used the phrase yesterday that it doesn't make sense. There's no reason that we should wear black. It's just that's what culture tells us to do.
Yes, you're right.
But actually, the number of funerals I take now, where the family will say, don't wear black, wear bright colours. We want to celebrate a life. And so we've lost, I've never seen anybody wear a black armband except on Downton Abbey. And so we've lost those rules, those structures around how we should mourn, just generally for any funeral. Now we have and we haven't, in a sense. I mean, absolutely. Because again, so it's a dissonance, and it was the same yesterday when you mentioned it doesn't make sense. I said it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense at the same time. You can hold two contradictory thoughts in your head simultaneously, because we know what we should be doing, but we don't know why. I think is the more accurate distillation, isn't it? As you say, why should? I think Hugh Edwards got into trouble for putting his black tie on too early in some quarters, whereas Peter Sissons, when the late Queen Mother passed, I think got into trouble with the same people, essentially, for not putting his black tie on soon enough. Because, a bit like our Constitution, these rules aren't written down, and I think these rules, because culture isn't as structured, these rules aren't as structured. So like I said, things like wearing black to a funeral, often people will wear bright colours. You add into that the layer of this isn't just any old funeral, but this is a state funeral. Yeah. The rules are simply not clear. We don't know, the conversation yesterday was, should things be cancelled? My understanding is when King George died, everything pretty much was cancelled. So
right. But it was 70 years ago. It was a very, very different era, wasn't it?
Totally different culture.
Still very much with one foot in the Victorian age.
Absolutely. And if you remember the Victorian age, they didn't talk about sex, but they talked about death. We talk about sex, but we don't talk about death.
I blame George Michael.
Yeah. So death is not something we talk about. It's not something we like. And the death of a monarch brings our mortality front and centre.
And we don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to do it.
I think as a culture, we really struggle with that. We struggle with the rules. And also, with, our culture is impacted by America. America's mourning rules are very different. But often we look at films for how we should do it. I mean, I think for me, I don't know what the poem is. It's used in Four Weddings and a Funeral. Stop the clocks, let the policeman wear black cotton gloves.
W.H. Auden. I was thinking of reading it out yesterday, actually. It's an absolutely beautiful poem about the loss of his lover, actually.
But
Stop
what
all
I
the clocks, hang up the telephone.
But what's really interesting is what I often say to families is, that's what we want when a loved one dies, but it doesn't happen. The world continues. Now, when the Queen dies, surely the clock should stop. Surely the policeman should wear black cotton gloves. And yet, if you've booked a holiday to Centre Parcs, if you've got
so nobody knows. Nobody knows. Do you have sympathy for the decision makers at Centre Parcs, given what you've just said? Do you think, crikey, they just didn't know which way to turn? And I do think the fear of being bullied by the Daily Mail, which I use as a catch-all term for media idiots.
Yeah, I think that fear is real. I think you're absolutely right. But yes, I do have sympathy. I think Centre Parcs is a little bit of a bigger organisation. I think it's one of the supermarkets. I think it's Lidl. On their explanation is, we want the staff to be able to take part in this momentous national occasion, which is why we're closing.
Well, I buy that up to a point. I can see that if the staff actually have that feeling, and that's something perhaps we can measure a little later in the programme, that idea of whether or not it is actually responsible bossing to give all of your staff the day off, even if it means turfing your customers out of their bedrooms in the case of Centre Parcs, which has now, for anyone not aware of it, has now been reversed. It was more salt and pepper, wasn't it, than George Michael's fault, that idea that we now all talk about sex too much. Well, not too much, but just instead of death. Crikey, Andy, that was a really erudite opener to a conversation that I had set up in a rather less serious way. And I love it when that happens. Light and shade is, of course, what we are all about. 28 minutes after 10 is the time. Kay is in Worcester. How many jokes have you had about the catalogue in the course of your lifetime, Kay? No?
Hello.
Hello, Kay?
Oh, yeah. Hi there.
I just did a good joke, Kay.
Oh, sorry, I missed you there.
I said, you're Kay and you're in Worcester. How many jokes have you had about the catalogues in the course of your lifetime?
Oh, gosh, yes. Loads.
Carry on. You had to be there. You had to be there for that one, Kay. Go on, what would you like to say?
I'm just elaborating on this debate about whether people feel like they've done the right thing with opening or closing their businesses next week. But I feel like there's been a lot of public pressure to do so, rather than giving people a choice, because it's all over Facebook as well. People are just already putting it out there saying that they think, as a mark of respect, people should close. And I feel like afterwards, if they don't do it, they'll be vilified for it.
Yes.
And then they'll be bad-mouthed, and people might say, oh, boycott that business, even though it's pathetic, really, because it's like most of these people aren't even royalists. I feel like they're doing it for the day off.
Yeah, well, I guess where newspapers lead, social media will follow, and we don't get to examine the purity of people's motivations. Do you run a business? Are you a business owner?
Yes, we do, and we did leave it to the staff, and obviously you've got to respect what the staff want to do. But then at the same time, like I said,
you suspect that some of your staff may be more drawn to the day off than the opportunity for
I'd 100% say that, yeah. Because, even previously in the past, we've not heard kind stuff about the royal family, so for a fact they're not royalists.
Right.
They're just doing it because they're thinking, everybody else stops.
Do you still pay them on bank holidays?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Well, in that case, I do wonder whether or not that is a consideration. You're never going to know for sure, though, are you? Because no one's going to say to you, yeah, I want the day off, but only so that I can... watch Netflix all day. Not so that I can pay proper respects to the Queen. And the pressure comes from. No, you're not talking about newspapers. You're talking about lower level. You're talking about chitter chatter.
Well,
you're talking about gossip and possibly some Facebook action.
Everywhere. It's everywhere. It's from social platforms.
Yeah.
It's from the media. It's everywhere, because if you don't do what is expected for that day, then, as I said, it won't reflect well on you afterwards.
And we don't know why. As Andy, the first caller, the Baptist minister, explained, we don't really know why this pressure exists, except for a form of conformity or mass hysteria, culminating in people who film themselves laying flowers, thinking it would earn them brownie points. And yet, thankfully, the population remains sufficiently sane to turn to such people and say, "Oh my days, you absolute weapon." It's 10:31. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. Few of you using my catchphrase from the early days of coronavirus, clarity and leadership. There just isn't any, which is why some companies are essentially blowing in the wind. Centre Parcs announcing yesterday they were going to send all their guests home for 24 hours, Monday morning to Tuesday morning. I truly didn't believe that story when I read it. I thought it was a joke, taking the mickey out of the overreactions of some of the other companies, but it was completely real. And inevitably, in my view, they U-turned a little later in the day. But Butlins moved very quickly to say, well, all our guests are still welcome, which is what happens when there isn't any clarity or leadership. Whether or not there should be clarity or leadership at times like this is much more debatable than it was during the early days of coronavirus, when Boris Johnson elected to miss 5 Cobra meetings, reportedly because he was working on a book that still hasn't been published. So I don't know whether it's not as serious in the sense of matters of life and death, but it probably is the sort of thing you'd expect, quotes, the state, end quotes, to step up and deliver, but they've delivered absolutely nothing, except the rather large logistical operation, particularly in London, that now surrounds the lying in state of Her Majesty in Westminster Hall. And LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, is keeping track of that developing story. 5 o'clock today, I think, Theo, the doors open, but the queues, as we've been hearing now for a couple of days, are expected to be epic.
They are, and this queue that I'm standing in right now already stretches from one corner, the south corner of Lambeth Bridge, back past Westminster Bridge along the south bank. There must be somewhere in the region of 5,000 to 7,000 people already waiting to be allowed to proceed past the coffin of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, for the moment, the queue is being held just on the south bank as a mammoth security operation across the river and around the Palace of Westminster is underway. We've got 4-metre high steel fences and barriers being put up, concrete barriers being put up in anticipation, of course, of the coffin of Queen Elizabeth being moved from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall, where it will lie in state, allowing for the members of the public to proceed past from 5 p.m. this evening all the way through to 6:30 in the morning on Monday, the day of the state funeral. We're expecting somewhere in the region of 750,000 people to make that journey. And I've been catching up with some of those at the very front of the queue, James, who've been telling me why they've come here to London to pay their respects. So you're just like a family now?
Yeah.
And what's brought you together?
Well, yeah, the reason, I mean, I've come here because I was born in the year that she was crowned.
1952. We won't mention your age.
No, I was born in 53. She was crowned.
Oh.
She got the throne, but she was actually, coronation was 53. And she's been queen all my life. And it's just a big emptiness. It's unbelievable that she's actually gone. And I just wanted to be here and chatting to everybody else. It's like we're all here for that same reason.
And why are you here, madam?
Well, I've spent the whole weekend crying, so I feel like I've been very overwhelmed by it, and I'm a lot younger, but I've kind of really felt it. It's like almost like I've lost me nan. Do you know what I mean? It just feels very like she was someone you knew. She was a constant in your life. Like you've seen her most days or weekly on the telly or doing something.
Came out at a point where she was really needed.
Yeah.
Like her speech in COVID.
100%.
Like every time there was something really awful happening, the Queen would pop on
and say the
and
right
just
thing.
lift you.
And she'd get it right.
Yeah.
She'd get it right.
And Christmas Day wasn't Christmas Day without the Queen's speech, was it? like, hang on, we all need to go in and watch the speech, and then I can carry on with Christmas. So, I mean, what will Christmas be like? It'll be a bit strange, really, to see somebody else do it, or if they do.
Do you think it'll be a bit odd?
It's going to be a bit weird for a while, I think, yeah.
And what none of you know each other before today, and there's a sort of sense of camaraderie?
We've all become mates, Theo. We've all now become mates.
I mean, if it wasn't for this young man here, I wouldn't have even got in.
We now think we're husband and wife, which we're not, because my wife would be really upset with me. But we're all good mates, and we'll go to the pub afterwards.
So it's a sort of moment, everybody's got something in common. A sort of unifying moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've come up on my own. And I thought it's going to be a long, long day, possibly a long night, and we just all gelled straight away. Everybody just started chatting and where did you come from? And it's just, it's the same bond.
That was a lady I was speaking to just a few moments ago here in the queue, just by St Thomas's Hospital, describing why she'd come, and the sense of cohesion, I guess, James, here on the south bank of the River Thames before everybody gets to, of course, pay their solemn respects to Queen Elizabeth II.
If you joined the queue now, how long would it take you to get to the front?
We would estimate, given there are probably about somewhere around 7,000 people in the queue at the moment, I'd probably be waiting about 4 or 5 hours from when it opens. So I'd probably get to...
No, I mean when it's open. I mean, obviously, the queue's moving.
No, the queue's not moving.
No, in my question, Theo, the queue is moving. I'm not. I know it doesn't start till 5 o'clock. So once the queue is moving, if you join the back of it now, how long would it take to get to the front?
About 5 or 6 hours, I think, James.
Really, that long? Just the other side of Westminster Bridge at the moment?
No, because it's from south side of Lambeth Bridge all... There must be at least, as I said, at least 5 to 7,000 people, and you're going to be given roughly, we understand, about 5 or 10 minutes in front of the coffin. I would have thought
in large groups, though, not each individual. In large groups as they go through. I'm just worried that I don't want to put people off from making the journey because they're going to be worried about having to sleep outside or something like that.
No, I don't think the weather's supposed to be very fine over the next few days.
Good.
Certainly from Friday through Saturday, Sunday. And I would say that if you're thinking about making the journey down here, it feels almost as if there's something quite special happening.
Yes, I can tell,
James. And people coming together. And I would say that if you're thinking about doing it, I'd give it I think it'd be worth turning up.
Good stuff. And how does it work? For just the rubric of it, do I get a wristband, or I mean, how? For example, if I pop off to get a sandwich, how can I resume my place in the queue?
So they are handing out wristbands.
Who is? Sorry to badger you. I'm very conscious here of people listening to us, possibly at the other end of the country, thinking, do you know what? I'm going to get on a train and do this, and I want them to know everything they need to know, mate.
Okay. So there are organisers who are being led. We've got soldiers from the Gurkha Regiment down here. There are police officers down here. There are sailors from the Royal Navy here, all helping out, handing out wristbands. And you can take a wristband, and then you can go to the toilet and go back to your place in the queue. But I would say this, James, is that there's a very sort of people are working together. It's sort of the public coming together and sort of making it work, so that people are saving each other's places.
That's nice.
So that you can easily pop and get a cup of coffee. There's a nice cafe, one of those sort of stalls behind me, which is set up where you can get a cup of coffee and a pastry to keep you going. People have got their camp, they've got chairs, they've got their waterproofs and brollies. There are plenty of toilet facilities available. I wouldn't say that if you're thinking about making the journey, there's nothing to put you off, I'd say. It's a well-organised, well-oiled operation with lots of people on hand to help you out, lots of people on hand to look out for you and make sure that everything runs smoothly. The biggest trouble you're going to get is from a reporter like me coming up and asking you silly questions.
Yes, I mean, do look out for that sort of thing, whatever you do. Finally, I gather there was a minor brouhaha about people who elected to spend the night in a hospital foyer. Is that true?
Yes, it was. Yes, there was a very small group who that were quickly snitched on to LBC, who had dived out at the front of the queue, having booked their places at about 10 o'clock yesterday, when it started raining during the middle of the night and camped out in the foyer of St Thomas's Hospital where it was nice and warm and dry. And then first thing this morning, as the rain dried up, they dived back into the front of the queue and that's between them and their maker.
Indeed it is. Theo, and forgive me for sort of bringing office gossip to the forefront of national radio. How long are you there for?
Good question, James. It could be a while.
Okay, I'll get me the programme controller on line 2, will you? I tell him I want Theo there for at least until dusk. I think that's. Have you got a little camping chair?
No, I don't.
Have you got a thermos? Have you got a flask of anything nice?
No.
Do you want me to send? Do you want me to send a little care package down to you? I could send Keith. I could send Keith.
I'll survive, James. I'll keep going.
Theo Usherwood, live from the growing queue of people waiting to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen, who of course will be lying in state, and those doors open at 5 o'clock today. And I think Theo gave a fairly good indication of what it might be like. And I only say fairly good because who knows how big the queue will be by 5 o'clock this afternoon. I mean, some talk of 750,000 people coming, but I think that was the total number of people coming to London, perhaps, and lining the streets for the funeral itself, rather than necessarily passing through Westminster Hall to see her lying in state. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you are in that queue and you do see Theo, be gentle with him. It is 10:48 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've just arrived at work, James. I was listening to you in my car on the way here. As an owner of 2 guinea pigs, I'm still in shock that there is an awareness week for them and that it has been postponed. Natalie speaks for many people when she writes, James, honestly, if I queue for 10 hours tomorrow and don't see Theo Usherwood, I shall be roundly disappointed. And Susanna brings the real stories. St Thomas's Hospital has gone into a form of lockdown now to stop huge crowds using the facilities. All staff must show ID to get in. It's unbelievable that people snuck in to sleep in the foyer. As Theo Usherwood rather portentously put it, that is between them and their maker. Stories I had to triple check because I thought that they couldn't possibly be true. Chapter 766. Preston North End Football Club have defended their decision to issue a lifetime ban to a supporter who tweeted them, "Will I be ejected from the stadium if I boo during a minute's silence for the death of the Queen?" And that's remarkable on 2 fronts. Number 1, it was a question, and he's been banned for life for asking it. And number 2, the game in which he was thinking of booing, I don't think went ahead anyway. But Preston North End have defended their decision to issue a lifetime ban to a supporter after he tweeted, "Will I be ejected from the stadium if I boo during a minute's silence for the death of the Queen?" And I mean it when I say that this is one of those stories that makes you wonder whether it is true or not. But Preston have told a newspaper, as a football club, we acknowledge every individual's right to free speech and personal opinions. But you don't, do you? You're like the fellow that rang in yesterday. You don't acknowledge every person's right to free speech and personal opinions. He only asked a question. In this specific case, because if you'd said yes, you would be ejected from the stadium, he probably wouldn't have booed, for heaven's sake. In this specific case, a series of tweets were put into the public domain and by association linked to this football club. They say there is a deleted tweet which crossed the boundary of acceptability, and by associating us as a club, a stadium ban was issued. Remarkable, whichever way you look at it. Unless the deleted tweet is toxic, but the headline suggests that the tweet after which he was banned was, "Will I be ejected from the stadium if I boo during a minute's silence for the death of a Queen?" So what's going on? On a serious note, there is a culture of bullying abroad that now infects almost every corner of British life. The most populist corners of the British media now do little else but bully people, whether it used to be Brussels bureaucrats, foreign workers, single mothers, unemployed people. But, there are hardly any unemployed people left. The ones that are unemployed are often ill, something we slightly overlooked in yesterday's phone-in. We've left the European Union, and that is inevitably going appallingly badly, but the people who told you it would be brilliant can't yet bring themselves to talk about it. Single mothers feels like a very Victorian area of attack, although they've had a go at resurrecting that in the last couple of weeks. Daily Telegraph ran a story about how
nuclear families were the healthiest, or whatever it may be, which is always a veiled attack on people who don't fall into a very uniform way of living. And who's left? Who are you going to attack now? Answer anybody. High court judges, lefty lawyers, doctors, train drivers. Meghan Markle, she's taken a hell of a lot of slack, hasn't she, from the professional bullies. God knows what they'd be doing if it wasn't for Meghan Markle, a largely blameless individual, taking absolute skiploads of abuse from all of the usual gammony subjects. Where would one go next? Answer. Anybody not properly. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It's been bothering me all morning. Do you remember that brief period during Boris Johnson's premiership when every politician that appeared on television from the government had 643 Union flags draped behind them and a picture of the Queen? Do you remember that? Not normal, I'm afraid. There's no way their offices are like that in normal times. And if they are, it's not normal. Yeah, and do you remember the guy at Oxford University who voted against taking down a picture of the Queen in the junior common room at his Oxford College, or the senior common room, anyway, the common room at his Oxford? He voted against it, but the newspapers got hold of his name and ruined his life because his fellow students voted to take down a picture of the Queen, largely overseas students who felt that it was either irrelevant or inappropriate. Do you remember that? It's in the sort of mad post-Brexit, I don't know what you'd call it, outbreak of absolute madness. So that's what's happened here. That's why I have some sympathy for the decision makers, thinking, well, look, if a grad student at Oxford who's done absolutely nothing wrong and voted to keep a picture of a Queen on the wall can have his life ruined by his own account. We spoke to Aditya Chakraborty at The Guardian who tracked him down, and his life was turned upside down. He's got post-traumatic stress disorder. Don't laugh. Imagine what it's like to be essentially accused of hating the Queen in the biggest selling newspapers in the country. You Google your name, and for the rest of your life, that stuff's going to come up. So that's what they're frightened of. They're frightened of the biggest bullies. Remember the bullies at school? Do you remember the bullies at school? Even if you weren't bullied, you're going to remember them. You're thinking of their name right now. Have a little think about how much of your behaviour you adapted in order to avoid the attentions of the bullies who were, luckily for you, largely bullying somebody else. How did you change your behaviour? What did you do? Keep your head down is the most obvious way to behave. Sometimes shamefully, we perhaps almost join in, because if we're on the side of the bully, then the bully's less likely to turn his attention on ourselves. Perhaps you just sort of thought, okay, I'm not going to do that then, because I'm not going to do what I know to be right, because the bully will attack me as a consequence. Just think about it. However long ago it was, I reckon you can remember. You can remember what it was like. I mean, at my kind of school, you get your head flushed down the toilet by bullies. Thankfully, something that never happened to me. But if it was happening to someone else, there was always that vague sense of relief. Oh, thank God it's not me. I used to get teased rather than bullied because in the context of my school, I was quite common, would you believe? I wasn't posh enough. And the next term, a lad arrived, lovely lad, still in touch, and he had a mild Geordie accent. Actually, it was a Mackham accent. It was a Sunderland, a very, very, very mild Sunderland accent. So suddenly, the fact that I came from Kidderminster no longer mattered because this lad actually had a regional accent. So he got all the sort of teasing, all the class-based teasing, and I was relieved, so relieved that I think perhaps I even joined in sometimes. But actual bullying, physical bullying, mental bullying, psychological bullying, what measures are you going to take to avoid it? Now you have people, riding high in this country in both politics. Is there a bigger bully in the country than Priti Patel? She's literally found to be a bully. They've paid hundreds of thousands of pounds of our money to someone who was a victim of her bullying. And until very recently, she was the second or third most powerful politician in the country, fated by the Daily Mail, which has turned bullying into a business model. So that's why it happens. And that's the flags in the background. Even the politicians who join in with the bullies are frightened of the bullies. Well, we better have 46 flags, Tristram. We better have 46 flags in the next press conference, Tristram, because Patel had 66, 37 at hers. Count the flags, Keith. Keith, count the flags. It's madness, right? If you want to put a picture of the Queen on your wall, fair play to you. It's lovely. I'd rather have a picture of my mum on my wall, as it goes. But if you don't want to put a picture of the Queen on your wall, that's your lookout too. Whatever job you do. The idea that it briefly became a sort of competition, it's exactly of a piece with how Centre Parcs has banned or sought or thought to do one of the craziest things in the history of crazy things. Mark's in Leeds. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Basically, I was just saying to research is guidance.
Yeah.
There's been no guidance at all. I've been talking to my mum about this.
Have you?
Like what happens when the Queen dies and stuff like that. And my mum says, well, we don't know. I'm not old enough to remember Diana's funeral well or anything like that, but we haven't had a death of a major monarch as in king or queen in 70 years, and because there's been no guidance, especially with the football and rugby, it was literally they were just like throwing a dice and seeing what happened. I believe that football got it wrong and rugby got it right, and Centre Parcs have got it wrong, but other organisations have got it right, like Butlin. So because there was no guidance, no one knew what to do. Basically.
Yeah, and if you don't know what to do, you often to better safe than sorry, and you end up doing something rather silly because you think, don't you, of the process. It's like that W1A show, the pastiche of the BBC. You think that somewhere in the decision-making process, somebody would have said, whoa, hang on a minute, lads. We've all taken leave of our senses. We can't send our paying guests home. Some of them are going to live 250 miles away. What are they going to go and do? Sit in the hospital foyer for 24 hours? Go and find... it just beggars belief. But if it's motivated by fear and confusion, anything can happen, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because of obviously social media at the moment and everything like that, they've been that scared and that terrified with what people will say about them. They don't want to make a brave or a strong decision based on that, because they're feared of the backlash, and it goes round quicker than hotcakes, basically.
And that is the national sport at the moment, isn't it? The idea of turning everybody into targets. I think the last Home Secretary was warned to stop attacking lawyers because one law firm had been the victim of attention from essentially from a terrorist, but they carried on regardless. Johnson went in both feet with lefty lawyers and all that sort of thing on immigration issues. If you can find a scapegoat, fantastic, because it withdraws and distracts attention from the absolute pig's ear that you're making of everything in the country, from Brexit right through to coronavirus and, of course, beyond. Thank you, Mark. We'll stay with this. I'm going to introduce a serious element to it as well. I think of Louise. It was Louise, wasn't it, in Watford on Monday, who, again, sent a text. It's the real mark of the week, actually, that it was a double-take text. I thought, that can't be right. We better ring her and just make sure we've got the facts right on this. But Louise's mother's funeral. She found out on Monday that the funeral scheduled for next Monday, the 19th, was no longer going to happen. It's a common experience, I've subsequently discovered, but not a unanimous one. Some funerals are going ahead. It just seems odd that there's so much confusion there. So we'll have a little look at the more serious consequences of these reactions. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's remarkable events unfolding. This is what happens when you rely upon the Mail for your facts rather than the Guardian. Apparently, the Guardian reports that the Preston North End fan who has been banned for life from the stadium after tweeting, will I be ejected from the stadium if I boo during a minute silent for the death of the Queen, also, according to The Guardian, joked about doing a Nazi salute, which may see your needle move. Maybe that is the kind of freedom of speech that should see you banned from your football club for life. Here's another interesting little example of how the world turns. I'll read you a story from a few years ago. Jewish museum volunteer Marianne Ferguson told the Prince that she fled to Canada with her family shortly before the Nazis annexed the Baltic coastal free city of Gdansk in 1939. After meeting Prince Charles, Mrs. Ferguson, 78, told the Daily Mail, the Prince said, and now Putin is doing just about the same as Hitler. A historically accurate and factual observation that, if anything, in the ensuing 8 years, given events recently in Ukraine, has become even more true. Which British politician do you think took to the airwaves to state Prince Charles was wrong to compare Vladimir Putin to Hitler? There are times when it might be better for Prince Charles not to get involved in things like this. Was it A, Nigel Farage? Was it B, Nigel Farage? Or was it C, I can't think of anyone else who would be so crass and so obnoxious as to say such a thing about someone that he's now pretending to revere and respect. But that is another mark of what happens when you allow inauthentic, bogus people into the public space and treat them as if they're serious. Vladimir Putin fanboys attacking Prince Charles. But now, because the demands of this slightly confected reverence have shifted, he has to change position completely. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. This might not work. Let me tell you that right now, because I don't want to go fully serious on this, but some of the stories we may hear now are going to be so serious that it may be inappropriate for me then to follow it up with someone who is spitting nails about the decision to postpone Guinea Pig Awareness Week. Do you see what I mean? It's light and shade, but crunching gear changes can sometimes... I mean, if I have a speciality, for heaven's sake, it's the crunching... Well, if I have a speciality, it's probably self-promotion. But second speciality would be the crunching gear changes, which I think we handle really, really well on this programme. But I'm conscious that this may be a crunch too far. So we're looking at silly decisions, laughable decisions that have been taken by individuals and institutions. I'd like to move your attention, or rather I'd like you to bring to my attention now perhaps some of the more serious decisions that have been taken. And we can do a responsible examination of whether or not it's the right decision to take. I'm going to start with food banks. I've read several reports, and you're going to be able to give me more detail on this, I hope. I've read several reports of food banks closing on Monday. Now, I've never had cause to use a food bank, and I doubt I ever will. I don't know whether shutting for one day has a particularly big impact upon the clientele. I genuinely don't know. I can imagine circumstances in which it would, obviously, but I can also imagine circumstances in which the people who run it act in such a way as to minimise any disruption or any damage done to people. If Monday's the only day you can get there, you've got a bit of a problem. You can't go on Sunday or Tuesday. So food banks are closing. We heard earlier from a listener whose neurosurgery is being, I mean, the word he used was cancelled, but you have to presume it is postponed. You also have the story from Monday of this week of Louise, who told us that she was absolutely staggered on Monday morning to be told that her own mother's funeral would no longer go ahead as scheduled. And in fact, I remember the details of the call. I say to you often, don't I, that some calls really stay with you. And that's one that's going to stay with you forever. You're never going to forget the lady who rang in to tell us that her own mother's funeral had been called off, essentially, and yet to be rescheduled, because of the Queen's funeral occurring on the same day. The point there being that the undertakers, when they rang up, or the funeral directors, when they rang up, they just thought it was a foregone conclusion. I'm sure you can guess why we're ringing, they said. And she's like, no. I mean, that's quite an odd thing for a funeral director to say. Imagine all the sort of macabre stuff that might pop into your head. I'm sure you can guess why we're ringing. No, I can't guess why we're ringing. Well, the family funeral's not going ahead. So what has happened in your world, and how fair is it? Do we need to be a little bit more open-minded now? So we can laugh at Centre Parcs. That is a bridge I am prepared to die on, okay? We can laugh at Centre Parcs. We can laugh at Guinea Pig Awareness Week. It's a wry laughter. I mean, it's a laughter born of frustration. Isn't that a James song? It's a laughter born of knowing about the bullying culture, knowing that the Daily Mail and its acolytes are responsible for creating a country now in which people are frightened of saying boo to a goose. A police officer can't dance at a parade or do anything that might annoy the utterly bogus, false morality of the morally bankrupt people running much of the British media. But some of the other decisions, some of the more serious decisions, A, we're not going to laugh at because there is nothing funny about them, and B, we perhaps need to consider the wisdom of. So, for example, Amy tells me food banks are shut every bank holiday anyway. I take your word for it, Amy. I don't know whether that's true or not. But if that is true, then that initial emotional reaction that you have to the story about food banks are shutting is not justified. It is not unprecedented. It is not remarkable. It's a little bit remarkable to drop a bank holiday into the calendar at a week's notice, isn't it? But we haven't lost a monarch for 70 years. I think it's the correct decision to have a bank holiday, albeit other reports suggest that it may accelerate recession. It may have a very negative economic impact on the country because so little business is being done, not just on the actual day itself, but in the period of mourning in general. So what I want to know from you is what has happened, if you have an actual story of that, and crucially, because you know how this programme works, how you feel about it. Because you may think it's the right thing to do, and you know, newspapers looking for sensation tend not to pay much attention to you. You say, well, actually, yes, I have had a medical appointment postponed, but it's quite right because, you know, the doctors and the nurses, it's a bank holiday now. They may want to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. Do you see what I mean? So I want the stories, but I also want the feelings behind them. The number you need, as ever, is 0345 6060 973. And then if you don't have a personal investment in this, if you don't have a personal story, then I'd love to know what you think about the atmosphere that we seem to be living in. It's odd. I would not have predicted that the criticism would be, so far as I can tell, and remember, I've only got two eyes, I've only got one perspective on this. So far as I can tell, there is more criticism being directed at individuals and institutions being seen to be overreacting than underreacting, which is odd. Because this is a country that in recent years has gone nuts for the underreaction. Just think about Poppy Day and the abuse heaped upon people who refuse or just forget to wear poppies, footballers. Particularly there was an Irish lad, wasn't there, playing for one of the Birmingham clubs, I think, who didn't want to wear a poppy for fairly obvious reasons. And he gets booed and he gets an annual attack upon him. There's a female journalist, I've embarrassingly forgotten which one, who makes a point of not wearing a poppy every year because it's performative and it's not necessarily authentic. You could be the biggest monster in the country, but you stick a poppy on yourself and you could be a Vladimir Putin fanboy who insults Prince Charles, but if you stick a poppy on your lapel, you can pretend to be a patriot. So it feels a little bit like that normally. This week, for some reason, it seems to be going the other way, and I'd love to know why you think that is. Why do we seem to be more attuned to the overreactions? Is this authenticity? Is this what we are really like when we're not being gaslit by politicians with 48 Union flags in the shop behind them? Is this what we're really like when we're not dancing to a tune set by poppy extremists? Is this actually what we're really like when we're not actually seeing appalling bullying coming from the right-wing media because they're too frightened themselves now of knowing which way to jump? I don't know. It seems odd to me that we're now looking at overreactions through a slightly gimlet eye. We're looking askance at the overreactions, not the underreactions. I prefer it, I have to be honest with you. I think, telling people they've gone too far or suggesting to people that they've gone too far is much healthier than somehow ordering that people go further than they actually want to. But as we've examined in the first hour, it is a consequence of a bullying culture. So let's look now then, 14 minutes after 11, what have they done in your world? And the NHS backlog here becomes a point. One of the earliest texts to come in this 5 minutes has been this one. Already months late, cancer appointments postponed yet again is not okay. That's what I want to hear about. I mean, is it from the point of view of the oncology department? Do they have any choice? It's a bank holiday, therefore certain protocols automatically kick in, which means we're blaming the wrong people. Ultimately, the people who decided to call a bank holiday are going to be blamed are going to be responsible for some of these decisions, but they're not going to get blamed for them. Okay, so food banks, medical appointments, funerals, and other serious personal events that are now not going to happen on Monday because of the Queen's funeral. How do you personally feel about it? And for the rest of us, why is this happening? Is it actually one of those issues that it would be easy to use to stoke up a big emotional reaction, but the facts would soon douse those flames? 0345 6060 973. It is 17 minutes after 11. Sam in Red Hill sends me a few lines from The Outsider by Albert Camus that are very pertinent, not just to the conversations we're having today, but to the conversations we have almost every day. Lying is not only saying what isn't true, it is also, in fact, especially saying more than is true. and in the case of the human heart, saying more than one feels. A neat encapsulation there of the type of clown who would seek to film him or herself laying flowers at for the Queen at the gates of one of the palaces, as, of course, the man who was not long ago condemning King Charles, as he is now, while praising Vladimir Putin, did just the other day. Stephen's in Leeds. Stephen, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, it's thinking about the cancel culture and what's been cancelled, Guinea Pig Week, whatever it is.
Postponed, Stephen, postponed. Do not alert the guinea pig community unduly. It's been postponed, not cancelled. A crucial distinction.
A crucial distinction. Well, I want to counter that in the sense that there are things that are still going on.
Yes.
I'm a funeral director, and I've got a funeral arranged for Monday.
Okay.
And when I found out on Saturday that the funeral was going to be on the Monday, I called the lady whose mother we're attending to on that day, and she was in tears when I phoned her because she was expecting like that previous situation. But I said, I just wanted to let you know that the funeral's going ahead. Nothing's changed, but the only difference is your mum is going to be buried at the same time as the Queen. So she was absolutely, ecstatic with that.
How much of that decision lies with you? Because I think the story we heard on Monday involved a crematorium, so you wouldn't be able to decide whether the crematorium was open or closed, would you?
No, but in my local authority, we've had emails to say that the crematorium will be operating as normal.
So again, it's postcode lottery over something as important as this.
Yeah, it's a little bit like COVID, where,
isn't it?
For example, in our second local authority that we use, there were no services allowed at the crematorium, no mourners.
Right.
In our primary local authority, we were allowed a certain amount of mourners. So the disparity between the two postcodes, which is 4 or 5 miles, is so great.
Clarity and leadership, isn't it?
Quality and leadership, yeah, always. So I just took the decision that I could ring round the people that I need to work with, the priests, the drivers, and everything. Everything's the same. We're not even charging bank holiday rates or anything. It's just normal. Apart from this lady is absolutely ecstatic that her mum is getting buried and having a service by a priest at the graveside at the exact same time the monarch of 70-year reign is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's everyone's free to make their own decisions, but the idea that some people are going to be told it ain't happening at all, and some people have been told by you in this case that it is going ahead is it just feels unfair. What normally happens on bank holidays? Presumably, you don't work normally at bank holidays.
People don't generally want to have funerals on bank holidays, but if we were using a crematorium, there's a premium,
right?
So they've got to get extra staff in and they've got to pay them.
So if you really wanted to, you could do it, so to speak.
Yeah. There's no reason why not, but it'd just be a cost implication. But we generally work 24 hours a day anyway because we're on call, so a bank holiday to us is not really neither here nor there. So we don't charge any extra anyway, but some of our suppliers do for deliveries and cremations and things like that, but it's not something I've ever entertained, to be honest with you, Jim.
No, fair enough. I hear you, and you sound like you take it well, as one would hope. You take your job very seriously, and you do it very well. Would you? And that's why you probably won't be tempted to answer the next question. But funeral directors who've taken the opposite position from you, who have sort of reached for the off button, how much of that will be in their gift, and how much of that would have been essentially thrust upon them by various authorities?
Well, again, it depends on your local authority. Where I am, there may be a selection of maybe 20 funeral directors, and maybe 3 of them will decide that they're not working that day, and maybe 17 will, or maybe 51-49. So I think that there is an element when the service is available, the crematorium, for example, that the funeral director could take it on themselves. Say, no, for whatever reason, I'm not going to operate that day.
I want to stay at home and watch events on the television. I want to mark the funeral of the Queen, and I don't know that you could necessarily describe that as selfish, but given that the fella over the road has also got funerals scheduled for that day, it does seem a bit odd, to say the very least. Stephen, thank you. That's really helpful. 11:23 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's a bit of a lofty one, I suppose, but if you do want to join me in having a crack at why the general public this week seem to be more perturbed by overreaction than underreaction. And I say it again, this is the country in which some newspapers will portray you as public enemy number one if you appear upon the telly without a poppy during the run-up to Remembrance Sunday. Why are we actually now more perturbed by overreactions than we are by underreactions on this issue? 0345 6060 973. Or, of course, as with Stephen's story a moment ago, the way it's impacting upon you, and the question of whether the more serious decisions that have been taken are justified or not. David is in Bristol. David, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call.
Hello, mate.
I regularly listen to your podcast, and I really admire the work that you do. So,
Thank you.
What's the phrase? First time...
Long-time listener, first-time caller. There you go.
So I was just driving between a meeting, and I caught the show live today, and I heard your comments. So I am a consultant doctor, and I work in an NHS trust in the southwest of England.
Okay.
And I just feel the cancellation of routine planned care across most of the NHS is wrong.
Right.
It's fundamentally wrong, and it upsets me.
Yeah, I can understand why. How I mean, you're going to have to generalise a bit, but how disruptive would it be? For reschedules and postponements, what kind of extra weight will people be looking at? Because you can call off Mondays meetings and operations and consultations, but Tuesdays are going to go ahead anyway. So it's not like you can just slot it all forward a day because those slots are full.
Absolutely. The area where we don't plan that far ahead with appointments, but across the piece.
So someone in your department might be told you can't come in on Monday. We don't know when you can.
Exactly.
Come on.
And for in sort of more acute hospital settings, we will provide weekend bank holiday level of care. So in the setting I work on a Monday, I may have been seeing patients on the intensive care unit, and they will have access to very good trainee doctors, but they won't have access to me. And that we'll have to pick up that work later in the week or defer some of it. But I think more for people with community appointments with nurses or therapists, or thinking more broadly in NHS with scans, planned surgeries. These are things people have been waiting a long time for, and they're important. And with respect to the passing of the Queen, they're more important than that.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. In terms of objective measurement, someone who's already passed away is not going to feel or be as important as somebody whose life could be potentially saved by a medical appointment that's now been postponed, in some cases indefinitely. How much of it is a direct consequence of it being a bank holiday, though? Because, it's both a unique bank holiday and a normal bank holiday. We've got more cognitive dissonance going on. It is presumably a lot of it is just what happens. You never get taken by surprise by a bank holiday. But we have
apart from this one.
Yes.
We have, 5, 6, 7 across the year, an extra one this year.
Yes.
And things can be planned around that, can be scheduled around that. But this has come at 8 days' notice. And I just feel...
But your hospital is behaving as if it was a normal bank holiday. They're
That's correct.
So that's not thoughtful, is it? I don't know that the hospital could have done anything differently. Do you think so? Could it have?
I don't know that we could have. We could have foregone the day and had an extra day's holiday elsewhere in the year. But I think there is, you've mentioned previously this sense that we all must respond in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be, open-minded, but not let our brains fall out.
That's nicely put. Is that your department?
It might be, yes.
It's not exactly brain surgery. David, thank you very much indeed. And also, it's one of the things I do love most about our time together every day is that we can together in this case with David, but so often with you as well, find things to smile about, even in the darkest and strangest circumstances. But there we are. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm turning into one of those good old days merchants. Am I? I hope not. I don't think I am. I just feel that under previous administrations, even under David Cameron, it doesn't have to be a party political thing, that before this, although he brought in the austerity, before this shrinking of public services, it's the old gully sucker principle, isn't it? People have started sending me photographs of gully suckers. They must be out and about again this season, because the leaves have fallen quite early, I think, this year. But the idea of small estate, these ghoulish, vampiric lobby groups masquerading as think tanks, have now infiltrated the very highest levels of government, and they hate the idea of money being set aside or systems being in place that may not be needed but may be. That's where the gully sucker comes in, the old engine that used to go up your road cleaning the gutters just in case they flooded. We don't need gully suckers, we only use them 4 days a year. Yeah, but when you stop using them, look what happens. And I do think, like clearing ice off pavements and then having to pay, not clearing ice off pavements and then having to make payments, personal injury payments to people who fall over on them. One department saves money, another department loses a ton. It or needs to pay a lot more for insurance. I just find it sad, actually, that seems to be where we are now. And it's deliberate, it's political. And under Liz Truss, who's now toying with the idea of getting rid of all the obesity measures that have been brought in by previous governments, something else that's beloved of the Tufton Street vampires, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. It's coming out to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Holly Harris is here with your headline. 11:33 is the time. Graham should win some sort of prize today. He says, "Good news, James. I'm a railway worker. On Monday, we'll be key workers again. We'll probably be back to being work-shy union Luddites by Tuesday, though, eh?" Yeah, mate. My commiserations with that one. And Kev has sent me a picture that very much falls into the category of I don't know whether this is true or not, but given us some of the stuff that we've already covered this week, it quite easily could be. It's one of those child's rides that you get in shops, you know, like the little ones, like a little Postman Pat van or something like that you can sit in. This one features a sort of yellow car that gives the impression of being pushed by a giant bunny rabbit. You know the ones you put. How much do they cost these days, Keith? About £1. It was about 10p when mine were little, or 20p. But you put a coin in it, and it sort of agitates a bit. The wheels might turn around, the music might come on, and the vehicle sort of rocks around a bit. Kids love them. There's one in Morrison's, and the parents hate them, I imagine, because the pest of power is absolutely immense. Please, can I? No, you can't go. Please. And they always put it by the tills, which seems to be designed for maximum disruption. But this one here, which Kev has sent me, and I've got no way of knowing whether or not this one is real or not, but given what we've learned this week about the British Cycling Association, Guinea Pig Awareness Week, and of course Centre Parcs, this could be true. This is what the sign stuck to the child's ride in an unidentified shop with large windows allegedly says. As a mark of respect to Her Majesty the Queen, we are suspending the use of this ride whilst the nation is in mourning. Thank you for your understanding. You explain that to a 4-year-old. Well, I suppose you probably could explain that to a 4-year-old. But it's another example of people not really having the first idea what they are and are not supposed to do. And there are, as we're discussing this hour, more serious elements to this conversation. The plans for Monday, says Bloke on a Bike, are ridiculous and embarrassing. Have you discussed the 0-hour contract people whose Monday shifts have been removed with no compensation? You add, the country is broken and rushing towards fascism. I might agree with elements of that final conclusion, but I don't see them as necessarily linked to the earlier comments that you've made, because these are largely going to be decisions taken by individual companies, individuals and institutions that have been taken, in your view and my view, for silly reasons, but not from where I'm sitting today, for fascistic ones. 11:35 is the time. Nikki is in Chelmsford. Nikki, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. Thanks for taking my call.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, what prompted me, I heard you mention about the food banks earlier. I find it absolutely astounding that food banks would consider closing on a bank holiday. I know it's an important bank holiday, but when it comes down to it, these people that come in, they've got a choice. It's like, what's their choice? Watch TV and watch a funeral procession, or eat. And I'm not a monarchist. It's not like I
understand.
But when you have to prioritise, I think eating comes first. Just to give you a little bit of brief background.
Go on, take your time. Hey, Nicky, take your time, mate. You've got all the time you want, all right?
All right, okay. I've got an addiction history, and I spent most of last year I was in rehab, and then I relapsed big time.
I'm sorry.
And then when I relapsed, I had to rely on homeless services.
Yes.
And then I got into another rehab. It's hard stuff, but I've had to rely on those services myself, and that's why I volunteer and give back. A section of the people that come into these services, the service users, they're street homeless. What are their options? You give them a tin of soup they can't eat, or they can sit down, have a hot meal, because they provide, the one I've been involved with provides hot meals. You know, they cook it up in the kitchen, take it through, give them a hot meal, or they can watch a funeral service. It's insane to think they would choose to watch it. If they're that concerned about it, I'm sure they can recall it. We've got big. We're open anyway, but we've got a big.
Your one is opening, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So there's a big TV screen up. So if people want to watch it, and the truth is, most people have got phones. We charge their phones for them while they're in there. They really want to watch it. They can watch it on the phone, or they can watch it later. I mean, to shut everything down, it's just insanity to me. And I can understand if supermarkets or anything else wants to close. When it comes to vital services and denying essential services to service users, it's just insane to me. I don't understand it.
I hear you, man. I really do. I wonder whether, because it relies on volunteers, the food banks that have announced that they're closing have made the decision because they don't feel that they can impose upon volunteers on such a potentially important day for them.
But James, there are paid workers there as well. There are people that are on payroll. Obviously it's not a huge amount, but they're committed and they're on payroll, and there are a lot of volunteers involved as well. But because I've been on both sides of it now, I've been on the other side of it, where I've needed services, and now I'm on the other side of it, trying to provide services. It just seems insane that anyone would actually close these services to.
Chân tàn nơi bể dâu, ngày mai rõ thôi, về đâu tình đơn. Ưa lệ, chân tàn nơi bể dâu, ngày mai rõ thôi, về đâu